Intelligence Officer Zixtal adjusted his datapad and looked through the viewing port of the hegemony flagship. The small blue planet below spun slowly, its surface covered with swirling white clouds and vast oceans. According to the scanner, readings this world called Earth was home to a species that called themselves humans. Zixtal made notes on his pad. The planet was unremarkable in most ways. It had one moon, plenty of water, and a reasonable atmosphere. But one thing stood out as very unusual. The gravity reading showed 9.8 meters per second squared. That was almost twice the standard gravity that most civilized species preferred. "How do they even move around down there?" asked Lieutenant Vexry, who was standing next to him. She was looking at the same readings with confusion on her face. "I suppose they have adapted to it over millions of years," Zixtal replied. "Though, I cannot imagine how uncomfortable it must be to live under such crushing weight every day." The first contact team had already made initial communications with the humans. The aliens had sent the standard greeting messages, and the humans had responded with what seemed like excitement. They were eager to meet other intelligent life forms, and had quickly agreed to send representatives to the hegemony ship. Admiral Kethmore walked onto the bridge, his tall frame moving with the elegant grace that came from living in proper gravity conditions. His species, like most in the hegemony, had evolved on worlds with gravity around 0.6 standard units. It was the perfect amount, enough to keep things in place, but not so much that it became a burden. "Have the human representatives arrived yet?" the Admiral asked. "Their ship docked 10 minutes ago, sir," replied Communications Officer Nalthi. "They are currently going through decontamination procedures." Zixtal had studied the biological reports about humans. They were bipedal, like many intelligent species, but they seemed quite fragile. Their bones were dense, which made sense given their high-gravity world, but they were still small compared to most hegemony species. The average human stood only about 8 meters tall and weighed around 70 kilograms. Most hegemony citizens were at least 2.2 meters tall. The bridge doors opened with a soft hiss, and the human delegation walked in. Zixtal watched with curiosity as 3 humans entered, led by someone who introduced herself as Ambassador Sarah Martinez. She was even smaller than the reports had suggested, with dark hair tied back and wearing a simple blue uniform. What happened next surprised everyone on the bridge. As soon as the humans took their first steps into the ship's standard 0.6G environment, they began moving very strangely. Ambassador Martinez took careful, slow steps, as if she was afraid of falling. Her 2 companions moved the same way, lifting their feet higher than necessary and swaying slightly with each step. One of the human companions, a man with gray hair, actually stumbled and had to catch himself on a nearby console. The other humans quickly helped steady him, but all 3 continued to move with the same awkward, uncertain gait. Lieutenant Vexry whispered quietly to Zixtal. "Look at them. They can barely walk in normal gravity. How did these creatures ever develop space travel?" Zixtal nodded, making mental notes. It was fascinating to watch. The humans seemed to have no natural grace or coordination when freed from their crushing home gravity. They moved like elderly individuals or those recovering from injuries. Admiral Kethmore stepped forward to greet the delegation, and Zixtal noticed that the Admiral had to consciously slow his movements. The humans seemed to have difficulty tracking fast motions with their eyes. "Welcome aboard the hegemony vessel Bright Star," Admiral Kethmore said, speaking slowly and clearly. "I am Admiral Kethmore, commander of this fleet." Ambassador Martinez smiled and attempted what looked like a formal bow, but she wobbled slightly and had to put her hand out for balance. "Thank you for welcoming us, Admiral. We are honored to represent humanity in this first meeting between our peoples." The conversation that followed was polite, but awkward. The humans had to sit down within a few minutes, claiming they needed to adjust to the different gravity. They asked many questions about hegemony technology and society, showing genuine curiosity and intelligence. But their physical limitations were obvious to everyone present. When one of the human companions tried to pick up a data pad that had been offered to him, he lifted it much too quickly and nearly threw it across the room. He looked embarrassed and apologized, explaining that he was still getting used to how light everything feels here. Zixtal found this very interesting from a scientific perspective. Here was a species that had somehow developed advanced technology, despite being trapped on a world with crushing gravity. Their spaceships were crude but functional, built like massive fortresses rather than the elegant vessels preferred by most civilized species. Everything about human technology seemed to be built to withstand enormous forces. After the meeting, Admiral Kethmore held a briefing with his senior officers. The mood was one of polite dismissal mixed with slight pity. "They seem friendly enough," the Admiral said, "but I cannot see them as useful military allies. Did you see how they struggled just to walk around our ship? In a real crisis, they would be more liability than help. Their technology is primitive too," added Chief Engineer Mordak. "Their ships use chemical rockets and nuclear fusion. They do not even have proper gravity control systems. Everything is built so heavily because they are used to their crushing world." Zixtal raised his hand. "Sir, they do show intelligence and curiosity. Perhaps they could be useful in other ways. Their world has abundant resources and they seem willing to trade." "True," Admiral Kethmore nodded. "We can certainly establish trade relations. They can provide raw materials, and we can offer them some basic technologies to help improve their primitive conditions. But as for military partnerships or advanced cooperation," he shook his head. "I think we all saw today that they are simply too limited by their evolutionary disadvantages." The other officers murmured agreement. It was sad in a way. Here was a species that had somehow managed to reach the stars despite the terrible burden of their high-gravity homeworld. They deserved respect for that achievement. But in a galaxy full of species that had evolved under reasonable conditions, humans would always be at a severe disadvantage. Zixtal made his final notes for the day. First contact with humans. Successful. Species assessment. Friendly, but physically limited. Recommendation. Establish basic trade relations. Provide humanitarian assistance where possible, but do not expect significant military or technological cooperation. As he finished writing, Zixtal looked out at the blue planet again. Those poor creatures down there, he thought, trapped on a world that crushed them every day of their lives. It was remarkable that they had achieved spaceflight at all. The hegemony would be kind to them, of course. It was only right to help those less fortunate. The human ships departed the next morning, still moving with their slow, careful awkwardness. Zixtal watched them go and wondered what it must be like to live your entire life under such crushing weight. He was glad he would never have to find out. Little did he know how wrong his assumptions would prove to be. 3 months had passed since first contact with the humans, and Zixtal found himself assigned to monitor the Sol system as part of the hegemony's expansion operations. What had started as a simple resource survey was turning into something more complicated. The problem began when the hegemony mining fleet arrived in the asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets of the Sol system. The asteroids contained excellent deposits of rare metals that the hegemony needed for ship construction. According to standard procedures, they had sent a notification to the local species about the mining operation, but they had not waited for a response before beginning work. This was normal practice. Most primitive species were grateful when the hegemony showed interest in their systems. The advanced technology and trade opportunities usually made up for any minor resource extraction. The hegemony always left the inhabited planets alone, and only took materials from uninhabited areas like asteroid fields. But the humans had responded differently than expected. They had sent multiple messages expressing concern about the mining operations. They claimed that the asteroid belt was part of their territory, and that any resource extraction should be negotiated first. Admiral Kethmore had laughed when he read their messages. Territory? They can barely walk in normal gravity, and they think they can claim ownership of an entire asteroid belt. Their most advanced ships take months to travel, distances we cover in days. The Admiral had sent back a polite, but firm response explaining that the hegemony was conducting standard resource extraction in uninhabited areas. He offered to share some of the refined materials with the humans as a gesture of goodwill, but made it clear that the mining would continue. This had led to more messages from the humans, each one more insistent than the last. They kept using words like sovereignty and territorial rights. They seemed to believe that being the only intelligent species in their system gave them some kind of claim to everything in it. Zixtal, was reviewing these communications when Lieutenant Vexry approached his station. "The humans have sent another delegation," she said. "They are requesting an immediate meeting with Admiral Kethmore." "Another delegation?" Zixtal looked surprised. "Did they not learn from the last time? They could barely function on our ship." The previous human delegation had been even more awkward than the first. They had stumbled around the ship's corridors, bumped into doorways, and one of them had actually fallen down simply trying to navigate a gentle ramp. It had been embarrassing to watch. "This time they are sending military representatives," Vexry continued. "Someone called Colonel Saracen and her staff." Zixtal made notes on his pad. Military representatives suggested the humans were taking this more seriously than expected. But what could their military possibly do? He had seen their ships. Slow, clumsy vessels that looked more like flying fortresses than proper spacecraft. When the human delegation arrived, Zixtal was assigned to observe the meeting. Colonel Chen was a small woman, even by human standards, with short black hair and a serious expression. She wore a dark green uniform with various insignia that meant nothing to the hegemony officers. Just like the previous delegations, the humans moved awkwardly in the ship's gravity. Colonel Chen took careful, measured steps and had to pause several times to maintain her balance. Her staff moved the same way, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. Admiral Kethmore greeted them in the main conference room, speaking in the same slow, clear manner he had used with previous human visitors. "Colonel Chen, welcome aboard. I understand you wish to discuss the mining operations in your system." "Yes, Admiral," Colonel Chen replied, her voice steady despite her obvious physical discomfort. "We need to reach an agreement that respects human territorial claims in the Sol system." Admiral Kethmore exchanged glances with his officers. The humans still did not seem to understand their position. "Colonel, I appreciate your concern, but you must understand the reality of the situation. The hegemony has advanced technology, faster ships, and centuries of experience in resource management. We are taking materials from uninhabited asteroids that your people cannot even reach efficiently." "We can reach them," Colonel Chen said quietly. "Yes, eventually." Admiral Kethmore smiled. "But it takes your ships months to travel distances we cover in days. Your mining equipment is primitive compared to ours. We can extract more materials in 1 week than your people could gather in a year." Colonel Chen was quiet for a moment, swaying slightly as she tried to maintain her balance. "Admiral, we are not asking you to stop all operations. We are asking for a partnership. Joint operations where both our species benefit." "And what could your people contribute to such a partnership?" Admiral Kethmore asked. "Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your people cannot even move properly in standard gravity conditions." One of the human staff members, a large man with a beard, spoke up. "We have other capabilities that might surprise you." Admiral Kethmore looked at the man who was gripping the edge of the table to keep steady. "Such as?" "We adapt well to difficult conditions," the man said simply. This caused quiet laughter among the hegemony officers. Lieutenant Vexry whispered to Zixtal, "Adapt to difficult conditions? They can barely stand up." The meeting continued for another hour, but it was clear that no agreement would be reached. The humans kept insisting on their territorial rights, while Admiral Kethmore grew increasingly impatient with what he saw as unreasonable demands from a primitive species. After the humans left, stumbling their way back to their ship with the same awkward movements, Admiral Kethmore called another briefing. "I tried to be diplomatic," he said, "but these humans simply do not understand their position. They are like children demanding to be treated as adults." "Should we continue the mining operations?" asked Chief Engineer Mordak. "Of course. They have no way to stop us, and we have done nothing wrong. We are taking materials from uninhabited asteroids using superior technology. If they cannot use these resources efficiently themselves, it is wasteful to leave them untouched." Zixtal raised his hand. "Sir, they seemed more serious this time." "The military delegation suggests they might be planning some kind of response." Admiral Kethmore shook his head. "What kind of response?" "Their ships are slow and primitive. Their people cannot even walk properly in reduced gravity. The most they could do is send more diplomatic protests." "Perhaps we should offer them a better trade deal," suggested Medical Officer Yelzra. "Something to keep them happy while we complete the mining operations." "I already offered to share some of the refined materials," Admiral Kethmore replied. "They refused and kept demanding joint operations. They want to be treated as equals when they clearly are not." Over the following weeks, the mining operations continued without incident. The human protests continued as well, but they were ignored. The hegemony fleet extracted millions of tons of valuable materials while human ships watched from a distance. Zixtal began writing reports about human behavior for the hegemony scientific community. His papers described humans as evolutionary dead ends, trapped by their world's excessive gravitational, he wrote about how the crushing gravity of Earth had prevented humans from developing the physical grace and coordination that other species took for granted. It is remarkable that they achieved spaceflight at all, he wrote in one report, but their physical limitations ensure they will never be more than a minor curiosity in galactic civilization. The reports were well received by other scientists. Several universities requested more detailed studies of human physiology and behavior. There was particular interest in how a species could develop intelligence while being so physically handicapped. Zixtal felt somewhat sorry for the humans, but science was science. They were simply unlucky to have evolved on such a hostile world. The best the hegemony could do was treat them kindly and perhaps help them relocate to more suitable planets where they might live more comfortably. But as the mining operations neared completion, something unexpected happened. Human ships began appearing in larger numbers around the asteroid belt. Not just a few vessels, but dozens of them. They maintained their distance but seemed to be organizing into some kind of formation. "What are they doing?" Lieutenant Vexry asked, studying the scanner displays. Zixtal looked at the readings with confusion. "I have no idea. Perhaps they are planning some kind of protest demonstration?" None of them could imagine that the humans were actually preparing for war. Far from the hegemony fleet, in a military facility hidden beneath the surface of Earth's moon, Colonel Sarah Chen was reviewing tactical displays with her command staff. The room hummed with activity as dozens of technicians monitored communications and prepared equipment for what humans had codenamed Operation Groundfall. "Status report," Colonel Chen said to her second-in-command. "Major Rodriguez. All Marine units are ready for deployment," Major Rodriguez replied. "The gravity suits have passed final testing and the assault teams are standing by." Colonel Chen nodded, studying the holographic display that showed the positions of hegemony ships in the asteroid belt. For 3 months, humanity had been preparing for this moment while the aliens continued their mining operations, completely unaware of what was coming. The truth was that Colonel Chen and her diplomatic team had not been clumsy during their visits to the hegemony ship. They had been moving carefully to avoid damaging the aliens' delicate equipment and infrastructure. Every stumble, every awkward step, every moment of apparent weakness had been carefully calculated. "It was harder than I expected," Major Rodriguez said, remembering her own visit to a hegemony vessel. "Their ship was built so lightly that I was afraid to touch anything. I nearly put my hand through a wall panel just trying to steady myself." Colonel Chen smiled grimly. "That was the point. We needed them to see us as weak and harmless while we prepared our real response. The preparation had taken months of careful planning. Human engineers had studied every detail of hegemony technology they could observe. Their ships were indeed advanced, but they were built for species that had evolved in low gravity. Everything was constructed to be lightweight and elegant, not to withstand the kind of forces that humans dealt with every day. "The irony is perfect," said Dr. Martinez, the chief scientist attached to the operation. "They think our high-gravity world made us weak, but it actually made us incredibly strong by their standards." Dr. Martinez had run extensive calculations based on the biological data they had gathered about hegemony species. The average alien would struggle to function in anything over 1 g of acceleration. Meanwhile, humans routinely experience forces of 3 g or more during normal flight operations and could survive much higher levels for short periods. "Their bones are hollow, like birds," Dr. Martinez continued. "Their muscle density is about 1/3 of ours. A human child could probably overpower most adult aliens in a physical confrontation. But Operation Groundfall was not going to rely on simple physical superiority. Human engineers had developed something the aliens had never seen before: variable gravity technology. Unlike the hegemony's static gravity systems, human ships could create gravity fields ranging from 0 to 5 times Earth normal, and they could change those settings instantly. "Show me the suit demonstration again," Colonel Chen said. On the main screen, a recording played of a human Marine in the new gravity suit. The suit looked bulky compared to normal space armor, but it contained revolutionary technology. With the flip of a switch, the Marine could adjust his personal gravity field from 0.1 G up to 3 G. In the recording, the Marine started by moving in 0.1 G, floating gracefully like the aliens expected humans to do in low gravity. Then he activated the 1G setting and began moving with the steady, controlled motions that came from a lifetime of living under Earth's gravity. Finally, he switched to 3G mode and became a blur of motion, his movements so fast and precise that they were difficult to follow with the eye. The aliens have no idea what they are about to face, Colonel Chen said. They think we are primitive because our technology looks crude compared to theirs. But we built everything to survive in conditions that would kill them. This was true in more ways than the aliens realized. Human spacecraft were not primitive. They were over-engineered. Every system was built to withstand enormous stresses because humans operated in a high-stress environment every day. What looked like crude, heavy construction to the aliens was actually incredibly robust and reliable technology. Human weapons were the same way. The hegemony used elegant energy weapons that were perfectly adequate for fighting other low-gravity species, but humans still used kinetic weapons, projectiles fired at extremely high velocities. These weapons were considered primitive by galactic standards, but they had one major advantage. They worked regardless of what kind of armor or shields the target was using. The physics are simple, explained Weapons Officer Captain Park. Piece of metal moving at several kilometers per second will punch through almost anything. Their energy shields are designed to stop other energy weapons, not solid projectiles. Colonel Chen walked over to a secure terminal and entered her authorization codes. On the screen appeared the final phase of Operation Groundfall, something that would shock the hegemony even more than the initial assault. Are the deep space units ready? She asked. Yes, ma'am, Major Rodriguez replied. 6 months ago, we launched unmanned probes to 17 different hegemony systems. They have been traveling in stealth mode, using cold fusion drives that are almost impossible to detect. Each probe contains enough information about human capabilities to make the hegemony leadership reconsider their position. These probes were another example of human engineering philosophy. They were not fast or elegant like hegemony ships, but they were virtually indestructible and could operate for years without maintenance. More importantly, they were equipped with quantum communication systems that would allow instant contact with Earth regardless of distance. The message is simple, Colonel Chen said. Stop the unauthorized mining operations and negotiate in good faith, or face the consequences. But the probes contained more than just messages. Each one carried a small demonstration payload, a kinetic weapon that could accelerate a small projectile to a significant fraction of the speed of light. The demonstration targets were uninhabited asteroids in each system, but the implications would be clear to any species that understood physics. They still have time to back down, Dr. Martinez said. If they agree to negotiate seriously, we can avoid bloodshed. Colonel Chen nodded, but she doubted the hegemony leadership would take the threat seriously. They had seen humans as weak and primitive for too long. It would probably take an actual demonstration of human capabilities to change their minds. Final equipment check, she ordered. All Marines report readiness status. Throughout the lunar facility, hundreds of human Marines were making final preparations. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were volunteers who had undergone special training for zero-gravity combat in variable gravity fields. Each one could fight effectively in conditions ranging from weightlessness to crushing acceleration that would instantly kill most aliens. Their armor was a marvel of human engineering. It provided life support, protection from energy weapons, and most importantly, it allowed the wearer to function in any gravity environment. The suits could even create localized gravity fields around the wearer, turning a human Marine into a walking weapon in the low-gravity environments that aliens preferred. Ma'am, we are receiving the final intelligence report from our observers near the hegemony fleet, Communications Officer Lieutenant Wang reported. Colonel Chen read the report with interest. The hegemony was nearly finished with their mining operations and was preparing to leave the Sol system. If humanity was going to act, it had to be now. Send the ultimatum, she ordered. Give them 24 hours to respond. The message that went out to Admiral Kethmore was simple and direct. Humanity demanded an immediate halt to all mining operations and the beginning of serious negotiations about resource rights in the Sol system. If the hegemony did not comply, humanity would take action to defend its territory. 24 hours later, the response came back. Admiral Kethmore rejected the ultimatum completely and stated that the hegemony would continue its operations. He added that any aggressive action by humans would be considered an attack on the hegemony and would result in serious consequences for humanity. Colonel Chen read the response without emotion. She had expected this outcome, but she had wanted to give the aliens one last chance to avoid what was coming. "Give the order," she said quietly. "Operation Groundfall is authorized. All units prepare for combat." Throughout the solar system, human ships that had been hiding in the asteroid belt and behind planets suddenly came to life. These were not the slow, clumsy vessels that the hegemony had observed before. These were warships built for combat in the harsh environment of space, and crewed by beings who had evolved to survive in conditions that would crush their enemies. The real war was about to begin, and the hegemony had no idea what they were facing. Zixtal was reviewing mining reports when the alarm started screaming throughout the hegemony flagship. Red lights flashed in the corridors as crew members ran to their emergency stations. He grabbed his datapad and hurried to the bridge where he found chaos. "Report," Admiral Kethmore shouted over the noise of the alarms. "Human ships, sir," Lieutenant Vexry called out from her station. "Dozens of them approaching from multiple directions. They're moving much faster than we expected." Zixtal looked at the tactical display and felt confusion wash over him. The human vessels were indeed moving at speeds that seemed impossible for their primitive technology. More troubling, they were approaching in a coordinated attack formation that showed military planning far beyond what anyone had expected from the clumsy species. "How fast are they moving?" Admiral Kethmore demanded. "0.7 light speed, sir," Communications Officer Nalthi replied, his voice shaking slightly. "That is faster than most of our own ships." This made no sense. Human technology was supposed to be primitive. Their ships were supposed to be slow and clumsy, built like flying fortresses because they did not understand proper engineering. But the vessels approaching them now moved with deadly grace and speed. "Open a communication channel," Admiral Kethmore ordered. "Perhaps we can resolve this peacefully." The main screen flickered and showed the face of Colonel Sarah Chen. But something was different about her appearance. Instead of the awkward, struggling woman who had visited their ship, she looked calm and confident. Her movements were smooth and controlled as she spoke. "Admiral Kethmore, this is Colonel Chen. You have ignored our ultimatum and continued unauthorized mining in human territory. We are here to stop you." "Colonel, surely we can discuss this reasonably," Admiral Kethmore replied. "There is no need for violence. We can share the resources we have gathered." "You had your chance for discussion," Colonel Chen said coldly. "You chose to treat us as primitive children instead of equals. Now you will learn what humans are really capable of." The transmission ended, and immediately the human ships opened fire. But instead of the crude kinetic weapons the hegemony expected, streams of projectiles moving at incredible speeds began hitting their vessels. The elegant hegemony ships designed for battles against other civilized species began taking damage immediately. "Shields are failing on multiple ships," reported Tactical Officer Hemdar. "These projectiles are punching right through our energy barriers." "How is that possible?" Admiral Kethmore demanded. "Energy shields should stop any physical projectile." "Sir, these projectiles are moving at nearly 10% of light speed," Hemdar explained, his voice filled with disbelief. "At that velocity, they have so much kinetic energy that our shields cannot stop them." Zixtal watched the battle unfold with growing horror. The human weapons were indeed primitive by hegemony standards. They were just pieces of metal fired at enormous speeds. But they were devastatingly effective against ships designed to fight energy-based weapons. "Return fire," Admiral Kethmore ordered. The hegemony ships began firing their elegant plasma cannons and particle beams at the human vessels. The weapons were accurate and powerful, designed to overwhelm the energy shields that most civilized species used. But when the beams hit the human ships, they simply absorbed the energy or deflected it harmlessly. "Our weapons are not effective, sir," Tactical Officer Hemdar reported. "The human ships appear to be armored with some kind of dense metal that our energy weapons cannot penetrate." "That is impossible," Admiral Kethmore said. "No ship can carry that much armor and still be maneuverable." But Zixtal was beginning to understand. Human ships were not elegant because humans did not need elegant ships. They had built their vessels to survive in the crushing gravity wells around planets and stars. What looked like crude, heavy construction was actually incredibly advanced engineering designed for extreme conditions. "Sir, 3 human ships are requesting permission to dock," Lieutenant Vexry announced. "They say they are coming aboard whether we grant permission or not." "Absolutely not," Admiral Kethmore replied. "Activate all security systems. Those clumsy humans will never be able to fight effectively on our ship." Zixtal wanted to warn the Admiral that maybe the humans were not as clumsy as they had appeared, but there was no time. The human ships were already attaching to the hull of the Hegemony flagship, and cutting sounds could be heard throughout the vessel. "Security teams to all docking areas," Admiral Kethmore announced over the ship's communication system. "Prepare to repel boarders." The first human marine to come through the hull breach was wearing armor unlike anything Zixtal had ever seen. It was bulky and powerful looking, with glowing elements that suggested some kind of advanced technology. But what happened next defied all expectations. The Marine stepped into the ship's 0.6G environment and immediately began moving with fluid, controlled precision. There was no stumbling, no awkwardness, no sign of the coordination problems that humans had shown before. Instead, the Marine moved like a predator, scanning the area with obvious combat training. "Open fire," the Hegemony security chief ordered. The security team fired their energy weapons at the human Marine, but the beams simply bounced off the advanced armor without causing any visible damage. The Marine raised his own weapon, a crude-looking kinetic rifle, and returned fire. The results were devastating. The high-velocity projectiles punched through the security team's light armor like it was made of paper. 3 Hegemony soldiers fell in the first seconds of combat, and the rest began retreating in panic. But retreat was impossible. More human Marines were pouring through the breach, and they moved through the ship's corridors like they owned them. Instead of the careful, awkward movements the Hegemony had observed before, they demonstrated speed and agility that seemed impossible. "How are they moving so fast?" Lieutenant Vexry asked, watching the security feeds in horror. Zixtal was beginning to piece together the truth. "I think they were never clumsy," he said quietly. "I think they were being careful not to damage our ship." This revelation was terrifying. If humans had been deliberately moving slowly and carefully during their diplomatic visits, what were their real physical capabilities? The answer came quickly. In the ship's main corridor, a human Marine encountered a blast door that had been sealed to stop the advance. Instead of using explosives or cutting tools, the Marine simply grabbed the door with both hands and tore it open. The metal shrieked as it bent, and the door was ripped from its frame like it was made of cardboard. "Impossible," Admiral Kethmore whispered. "No organic being has that kind of strength." But the displays showed that it was very possible. Human Marines were moving through the ship, tearing through barriers that should have stopped any normal species. Their strength was beyond anything in Hegemony records. More disturbing, the humans seemed to be adjusting their local gravity somehow. Zixtal watched security footage of a human Marine who suddenly began moving in what appeared to be much higher gravity. The Marine's speed increased dramatically, and his movements became even more precise and controlled. "They have personal gravity control," Dr. Yelzra said, studying the readings from her medical scanners. "Their armor is generating variable gravity fields around each individual." This was technology beyond anything the Hegemony possessed. The ability to instantly adjust personal gravity would give warriors enormous advantages in combat. They could move in zero gravity when they needed speed and agility, or increase gravity when they needed stability and power. "Sir, they have reached the bridge level," Lieutenant Vexry announced. "Security teams are falling back on all fronts." Admiral Kethmore looked around the bridge with desperation in his eyes. "How many humans are aboard?" "Scanners show approximately 40 Marines, sir," Tactical Officer Hemdar replied. "But they are moving through the ship like they own it. Our security forces cannot stop them." The bridge doors suddenly groaned and began to bend inward. Something incredibly strong was trying to force them open from the outside. The thick metal doors, designed to withstand explosive decompression, were being deformed like soft clay. "Everyone stay calm," Admiral Kethmore said, but his voice was shaking. "They are still just primitive humans. We can negotiate with them." The doors finally gave way with a screech of tortured metal, and 3 human Marines stepped onto the bridge. They moved with the controlled precision of trained killers. their weapons tracking potential threats with mechanical accuracy. The lead Marine removed his helmet, revealing the face of Colonel Sarah Chen. But this was not the awkward, stumbling woman who had visited the ship before. This was a professional soldier who had taken control of a hegemony flagship with just 40 Marines. "Admiral Kethmore," she said calmly, "I believe we need to renegotiate our agreement." Zixtal looked around the bridge at his fellow officers and saw the same shock and fear in all their faces. Everything they thought they knew about humans had been wrong. These were not primitive, clumsy creatures trapped by their high-gravity world. These were apex predators who had just declared war on the galaxy. 6 months later, Zixtal sat in his new office on the hegemony homeworld, staring at the final report that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. His hands shook slightly as he typed the last few sentences, still processing everything he had learned. The surrender had come quickly after the humans demonstrated their true capabilities. Once Colonel Chen and her Marines had taken control of the flagship, the rest of the hegemony fleet had no choice but to stand down. The humans had not been cruel. They had simply been overwhelmingly superior in every aspect of warfare. But the real shock had come in the days following the battle, when humanity revealed the full scope of their preparations. The unmanned probes that had been secretly placed in 17 different hegemony systems, all activated simultaneously, delivering messages and demonstrations that left no doubt about human capabilities. Each probe had fired a single kinetic projectile at an uninhabited asteroid in its target system. The projectiles, accelerated to nearly 20% of light speed, had completely destroyed asteroids several kilometers in diameter. The implications were clear. Humanity could strike any target in the galaxy with weapons that no known defense could stop. The demonstration was not a threat. Colonel Chen had explained during the negotiations that followed. It was a simple statement of fact. We have the ability to defend ourselves and our interests anywhere in the galaxy. Zixtal had been present during those negotiations, serving as a cultural advisor to help the hegemony leadership understand their new situation. What he had learned about humanity during those talks had fundamentally changed his understanding of evolution, physics, and warfare. "Your species evolved under conditions that we would consider a death sentence," Dr. Yelzra had said during one scientific briefing. "The gravity on your homeworld is so strong that most hegemony species would be crushed to death in minutes." Colonel Chen had smiled at this. "We know. We have studied your biology extensively. The average human child is stronger than most adult members of your species. Our teenagers routinely experience acceleration forces during recreational activities that would kill your trained pilots." This was the key insight that had escaped everyone during first contact. Humans were not weak creatures struggling under crushing gravity. They were incredibly strong beings whose entire evolution had been shaped by forces that would destroy other species. Every human was essentially a living weapon, forged by millions of years of survival in conditions that the rest of the galaxy considered uninhabitable. "But you seem so clumsy on our ships," Admiral Kethmore had protested during one meeting. "We were being careful," Colonel Chen had replied. "Your ships and equipment are built for low-gravity species. We were afraid of accidentally damaging something important. A human moving at normal speed in a low-gravity environment can easily break things that seem solid to you." Zixtal had seen demonstrations of this during the negotiations. Human technicians working on damaged hegemony equipment had to move with extreme care to avoid accidentally crushing delicate components. What looked like advanced, sophisticated technology to other species was actually quite fragile by human standards. The military implications were staggering. Human soldiers could operate effectively in gravitational fields ranging from 0 to 5 times Earth normal. They could survive acceleration forces that would instantly kill other species. Their weapons, while primitive by galactic standards, were devastatingly effective against ships and armor designed for low-gravity species. But perhaps most impressive was human engineering philosophy. Where other species built elegant, efficient systems optimized for ideal conditions, humans built robust, over-engineered solutions that could function in extreme environments. Their primitive technology was actually incredibly advanced. It just looked crude because it was designed to work under conditions that would destroy more elegant systems. "We do not build things to be beautiful," a human engineer had explained. "We build things to work when everything goes wrong." This approach had given humanity enormous advantages in space warfare. Their ships were not fast or elegant, but they were incredibly tough and reliable. Their weapons were not sophisticated, but they were simple, effective, and worked in any environment. Their soldiers were not graceful, but they were stronger and more resilient than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The peace negotiations had been surprisingly brief. Humanity had not wanted conquest or dominance. They had simply wanted respect and fair treatment. Once the hegemony acknowledged human territorial rights and agreed to genuine partnership, rather than condescending charity, the humans had been willing to share their technology and resources. "We do not want to rule the galaxy," Colonel Chen had said. "We just want to be part of it as equals." This had led to the most remarkable period of technological advancement in hegemony history. Human engineering techniques, applied to alien technology, had produced incredible innovations. Ships became stronger and more reliable. Weapons became more effective. Most importantly, variable gravity technology had revolutionized space travel and colonization, but there had been costs as well. 3 hegemony colonies had requested immediate relocation assistance after learning about human capabilities. Several species had petitioned for protected status, fearing that humanity might decide to expand aggressively. The psychological impact of learning that humans were apex predators had been enormous. Zixtal had spent months studying human psychology and culture, trying to understand how such a powerful species had remained relatively peaceful. What he had found was fascinating. Humans were indeed predators, but they were also highly social creatures with strong ethical frameworks. Their strength was balanced by restraint, their capabilities tempered by wisdom. "We learned long ago that strength without control leads to destruction," a human philosopher had explained. "Our homeworld taught us that survival requires cooperation as much as individual power." This was perhaps the most important lesson of the entire First Contact experience. Humanity was not just physically superior to other galactic species, they were also more experienced at controlling their own power. Their high-gravity homeworld had not just made them strong, it had made them disciplined. Zixtal finished typing his report and read through it one final time. The document would become required reading at every hegemony military academy and diplomatic school. Its conclusions were simple but profound. First, never judge a species by their apparent limitations. What looks like weakness might actually be restraint. Second, always research a species' homeworld conditions before making contact. Environmental factors can produce capabilities that seem impossible by galactic standards. Third, respect is not something that can be given as charity. It must be earned through understanding and mutual cooperation. But the most important conclusion was contained in the report's final recommendation, which had already been implemented as mandatory hegemony policy. Before engaging any unknown species, always check their homeworld's gravity first. Never, under any circumstances, mock a species that considers 10G acceleration a mild workout. Zixtal submitted the report and leaned back in his chair, looking out the window at the hegemony capital city. In the distance, he could see construction crews working on new buildings designed with human engineering principles. The structures looked massive and overbuilt compared to traditional hegemony architecture, but they would also be virtually indestructible. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through force. They had done something much more impressive. They had earned their place through demonstration of capabilities that no one had imagined possible. They had turned their apparent weakness into their greatest strength. The galaxy would never make that mistake again. Zixtal opened a new file and began working on his next report, a detailed analysis of human recreational activities and why most of them would be considered extreme sports by other species. The more he learned about humanity, the more amazed he became that they had turned out to be as peaceful as they were. After all, any species that considered jumping out of aircraft for fun was clearly capable of almost anything.